It has been a minute, but welcome back, everybody, to another in the series for our ICF house build. Alila and I have been hard at work on the house, but I have been making it a little less of a priority to edit and post videos. Let's hope today's update is the start of a string for the few of you who want to know how it all ends up. We last checked in when we did the concrete pour for the main walls. This video will have two major changes from that one. First, it's just the two of us again. Alila suggested we let our volunteer concrete army rest up for a while so that they'll still come out the next time we want to call in favors. Second, even though you've heard these excuses before, there are going to be big jumps in progress without footage. Like my editing, I've also been a little derelict in setting up the cameras each and every day for every single task. So some things are going to get lost in that shuffle. Anyway, today we're building some support walls for our garage beam. We're lifting that garage beam, and then we're going to look at how we're going to get some of our roof elements into place without additional rental equipment. So let's get into it. I'm starting with the back wall to the garage. And from this angle, you might notice we're doing a pretty thick wall. There are two main drivers of this. First, it's much easier to transition from the ICF foundation to the framed wall when the depth of the blocks match the depth of the wall. We use 6-inch core blocks that have a total depth that is a convenient 11 1/4 inches. By convenient, I generally mean that it matches a 2x12 for actual dimensions. You might now be asking, much like I would, who in their right mind would frame a wall with 2x12s? Well, truthfully, the answer I would hope to hear out of most people, normally, would be nobody. But what I ended up doing was spending money on 2x12s as walk planks for the ICF braces while we were pouring the concrete. So we're simply repurposing what is now on-hand lumber that has no other targeted use for this project. A secondary benefit of this is that we can stuff a variety of items in this wall, which includes the electrical feed, any plumbing, we can make recessed shelving, or just put in tons of insulation. And since we knew this is how it was going to happen months ago during the design phase, we simply accounted for the potentially lost space and adjusted our dimensions for the house accordingly. Anyway, I'm doing a solo workday here, and it goes together a bit slowly at first. Trying to build and then lift wall sections by myself on 2x12s was not really practical, so I built it stud by stud. And at the end of the day, the back wall is in place, and over the same weekend, I was able to get some of the other interior partitions completed. I don't really have any footage of that effort, but if you've seen one wall go up, you've seen them all go up, and I'm not really adding much to that conversation. The back wall is framed 24 inches on center, partly because, other than the posts for that beam, it's not really a load-bearing wall, and partly because that reduces the thermal bridges to the outside. And sure, the garage is also insulated and kind of a buffer to the outside, but if I'm going to do all this work, why not do it as best I can? You can also see, as I'm going along here, I've got the 4-ply post ready to support the beam for the garage, but before I get to put that up, the camera dies, so I'm going to go ahead and recharge that, and then we'll get on to the next item of the list, lifting the beam. One of the choices we had to make was whether to pour another footing pad in the garage for a mid-span post, or if we wanted to size our beam to allow for a fully open plan in the garage. Now we have the barn as a workshop, so it's really just storage and parking for the garage, and that means a post wouldn't really be that much in the way. But we had plenty of ceiling height to work with, given that our garage floor is 2.5 feet below the house floor, and the roof remains coplanar with the rest of the house. So in the end, we decided for the clear span just out of we can. Now in order to clear that span, we had the lumberyard give us some options for beams, and they came back with 2 LVL combinations that would span the 24-foot length of that beam, and still support our local snow load. The first option was 4 plies, 20 inches deep. The second option was 3 plies, 26 inches deep. I kind of bounced between more lighter plies and fewer heavier plies, and then convinced myself it would be way easier to do 3 layers instead of 4. and it also came out slightly cheaper, so make of that what you will, but we went with 3. Now, lifting this beam as a pre-laminated assembly was absolutely out of the question. I don't have the equipment on hand to lift something that's over 700 pounds, and I didn't really want to rent a crane and an operator for a single lift. And while I can get a generic telehandler pretty cheap to rent for a day, renting one that could actually reach up, out, and over the wall was surprisingly expensive. So I did what I usually do in cases like this, a little bit of backwoods engineering. I whipped up an idea for a boom extension for the excavator, much like when I did the trusses for the barn. But this time I felt it had to be a little better. If I dropped a barn truss, it just fell under the ground, and I was only out $100. If I drop something over the house, that's potentially lost work and a lot more expensive. Not to mention, I'm going to be reaching out much further than just a little bit taller when I was doing the barn. And for 2, these LVLs came in a bit heavier than the barn trusses. Now, in hindsight, the 4x4 I used on the barn was a little sketchy, even for me, and I wanted to step it up. So I figured I'd buy some steel and even did some calculating of loads and forces to make sure I wasn't creating a safety issue. The cost of the steel and the time spent welding was a fraction of the cost of a single-day rental for even a basic telehandler. I ended up building a 14-foot extension with thick wall rectangular tubing, a 5/8-inch steel plate, and some pre-cut mounting ears for the excavator quick coupler. It took an hour or so to weld it all up, and we were set for lifting 1 ply at a time. Now, each ply and each individual LVL weighs in at around 240 pounds. Now, this boom extension has a safety factor well above 1 for this particular lift, so I'm confident it won't bend, break, or yield. But when adding 14 foot to the end of where the bucket normally is, it was definitely a little bit bouncy when I was at full reach and loaded with 240 plus pounds at the end of this stick. Now that I'm reflecting on it, I guess if I'm actually running beam stress analysis, I lose a little bit of the backwoods engineering claim, but I might have some redemption in the risk I'm taking in relying on the quality of my DIY welding skills to not be the weak point. Lifting the individual beams turned out to be a little bit of an adventure in itself. Not in terms of risk. I felt confident we were strapping this thing together pretty well, and nothing really went bad. However, you might notice we're flying those beam plies up and over the house, and then trying to slot them into a pocket. I'm sitting in the cab of the excavator, and as we fly it past the wall, I lose sight of them, which means I rely on some two-way radios and Alila giving me some guidance. And when you're lacking crystal clear communication, as most of us humans do, I ended up having to get in and out of the excavator quite a few times until we really found our groove. So this first ply probably took a good 25 minutes of just back and forth figuring it out, and the next 2 plies took the same amount of time combined. But we did end up getting it slotted in. That sandwich of layers was eventually done, a few boxes of timber lock screws later, and I think we can move on to the next steps of the roof. The next step picks up partway through the task. That is, lifting the rafters into place. We use single-length I-joists that are supported mid-span. That's what the beam was for in the last step. This side of the house is the shorter side, and they're 34 feet long. The off-camera part was me finding centers, lifting slightly off-center to get the roof pitch on the lift, and then laying the rafters approximately into place. I would then pop out of the cab, up onto a ladder, unhook, and repeat. And once I had 3 or 4 in place, I could roll them up, nail them down, and move on. But what we see here is actually day 2, and Alila was back to help. This time, the main learning comes from asking the question, why on earth did I start from front to back? This definitely added an element of difficulty, and we fixed that on the opposite side of the house. And we also invited a third person to add efficiency on day 3. Didn't record that though, so let's carry on. You can see it's really just back and forth, load up a rafter, place it, nail it, repeat. After the garage beam, this really was just more time spent and not really all that much in the way of learnings. other than that boom lift extension is really saving me a bunch in rental costs, especially since the I-joists were only about half the weight of the LVLs. There was even less risk to these lifts. But let's see if we can change that and figure out what else this stick of steel can do. For the final part of today's video, we're getting our sheathing into place. The helper we had on day 3 of the Rafters made things go super fast, and as a result, I didn't get much of any useful footage, even though I tried. Randy showed up eager to work, climbed the tops of the walls a bit like a goat, of course aided by them being a foot thick in concrete, and was able to roll and fasten the rafters as quickly as I could get them lifted up to him. That left an overcast Sunday here on which we could get some of the sheathing panels into place and start to darken the house. Another in the stages of Alila's equipment growth, she decided she preferred to pilot the excavator as a lift instead of being the one to climb on the bare rafters. I can't really blame her for that. It's a little unnerving, and I don't really mind the climbing. Besides that, I'm fairly certain she gave me a gift in choosing the harder job here and sparing me from having to climb up and down from the top of the roof with each lift. This set of lifts, however, became a balance of how much we felt the boom extension could actually handle without breaking, how much Alila was willing to wrestle with the stack of sheathing, and how quickly I could place, nail, and ready a spot to place the next lift. As with everything else in this build, it took some learning to figure out what worked best for us. But also, like everything else, we eventually do figure it out. Speaking of figuring it out, that's exactly what we're going to continue to do with this entire video series. Like I mentioned earlier, we've been hard at work, and as I edit this video, the house has now passed all of the rough inspections, and I'm working on drywall. But a lot happens between what we watched today and getting to the point we're at in real time. So if you haven't already, I'd appreciate a click of that subscribe button down below, and if you're so inclined, hit the like button and maybe leave a comment as well. That way I'm encouraged to keep sharing progress, and you'll get to see how good, bad, or potentially otherwise this whole endeavor turns out. But until then, thanks for checking in.